üzerine yurdu. Mimarlığını tanıyacağız Zvi Hecker'in ve uluslararası mimarlık ortamında aslında adı çok iyi bilinen bir mimar. Çok üretken, kendine has bir mimarlık anlayışı var. Aslında Hecker Krakow doğumlu, yani Polonya doğumlu ama onlu yaşlarını Semerkant'ta geçirmiş. Sonrasında İkinci Dünya Savaşı sonrasında Polonya'ya geri dönüyor ve orada mimarlık eğitimine başlıyor. Ama mimarlık eğitimine İsrail'de devam ediyor. İsrail'e taşınıyor ondan sonra. Sonrasında Almanya'ya giden Zvi Hecker orada birçok yarışmanın ödülünü alıyor, kazanıyor ve birçok uluslararası okulda eğitim veriyor, mimarlık eğitimi veriyor. Ödülleri çok, birçok Polonya'dan, Amerika'dan, yani Birleşik Devletler'den, Kanada'dan aldığı ödüller var. Dolayısıyla önemli bir isim. Fakat başlığa da sevgili Paola'nın yazdığı gibi mimarlığın hafızasının toprak olduğunu söylüyor. O toprak olmadan da mimarlığın yapılamayacağını, büyütülemeyeceğini söylüyor. Dolayısıyla Paola bize bütün bunları anlatacak ama ilginç bir malzeme üzerinden anlatacak. 46 tane eskiz defteri var Zvi Hecker'in. Bu 46 eskiz defteri üzerinden onun mimarlık serüvenini ve mimarlık anlayışını anlamaya çalışacağız. Paola Ardizzola'ya gelince, Paola Ardizzola mimar, doktorası şehircilik ve mimarlık üzerine, DAAD değişim bursiyeri aynı zamanda ve Gdansk Teknik Üniversitesi ile Darmstadt Teknik Üniversitesi'nde davetli misafir öğretim üyesi olarak bulundu kendisi. Ayrıca Lübnan, Mısır ve İngiltere gibi birçok ülkede akademisyenlik ve eğitmenlik yaptı. Şu anda İzmir Yaşar Üniversitesi Mimarlık Fakültesi'nde öğretim üyesi olarak görev yapmakta. Araştırma alanları 20. yüzyıl mimarlığı ve şehircilik üzerine ve bu konuda birçok yayını var kendisinin. Aynı zamanda çalıştığımız ortak bir konu da var. Bruno Taut, Paola Bruno Taut Türkiye yılları üzerine çok başarılı bir tez yaptı ve bu çalışma ile de Uluslararası Bruno Zvi ödülüne sahip. Birçok derginin ve konferansın organizasyonunda bilim kurulu olarak da görev yapmakta. Evet, Paola. Thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so before starting, I really wish to thank Professor Zvi Hecker for this wonderful invitation. The first time I came to Ankara, it was 2000. I was a shy PhD visiting student at Middle East Technical University. I met some of the best scholars at that time, and now colleagues and friends. Some of them are here. And it's always a big honor and pleasure for me to come back to Ankara because this is home to me. So really, thank you very much for this invitation. And today I want to share with you some of the results of my latest research, which is still ongoing. For the last 5 years, I've been studying the work of the architect Zvi Hecker, focusing especially on his sketchbooks. And you know, the topic I decided to present is very challenging because Of course, we will not explore, you know, in a chronological way all his works, but actually his approach to architecture is so polyedric that there are different key readings, different possibilities. So I thought that memory, which is something that he often mentioned in his sketchbooks, could be an interesting way, especially in the contemporary times where everything changes so fast and runs so fast, and sometimes also with the architect, you know, we are just projecting our ideas into the future, but I think that if we are not aware of our past, we cannot really get into the future. This is especially for students in architecture, if there are some here. And so let's start immediately. So Zvi Hecker was born as a Polish Israeli architect. He was born in Krakow, Poland in 1931, and he passed away in Berlin in September 2023. And this is one of his sentences, and many of them are written in the sketchbooks. And in this presentation, I will share with you some of his words directly, as if really he's talking to us. So nothing grows without soil, and architectural memory is the architect's soil. But the point, and what we are trying to explore together, is what does he mean for memory? Because, you know, of course, it might have a very large, different meanings. And in order to understand what memory is for us, I think it's very important to be aware of his biographical path as a foundation for his memory. Because as already introduced, he experienced and lived in many different places since his very first childhood. So in 1938, with his family, he was forced to flee to Siberia. So probably you know that in 1938-39, Hitler and Stalin, they literally divided the Jewish people living in Poland. And Zvi Hecker, who had a strong sense of humor, used to say, actually, Hitler saved my life because he decided that my family was destined to Siberia. So he went to Siberia, and after a while, the family moved to Samarkand. It's Uzbekistan nowadays. And in Samarkand, as we will see, of course, he met the Islamic architecture. Then, in the second half of 40s, the family, after the end of the Second World War, went back to Krakow, but Krakow was a city almost completely destroyed. So he started his architectural studies at University of Technology, but really soon after they left the family and they moved to Tel Aviv. Now, I brought an image of Krakow, of course, with the important reconstruction, because the city of Krakow is something important in his memory as a component. I mean, he was impressed by this medieval city, the way he experienced it, because of these important city walls and the idea of, you know, having a fence, a perimeter, which is protecting something which is taking place inside. This will be a recurrent topic in his architecture. Then he moved to Samarkand, and thanks also to another exiled architect, Isaac Palterer, this young architect brought Zvi Hecker in, you know, those places of monumental architecture, traditional architecture, and this young boy started to sketch, and he wrote, we were sent to Samarkand in Uzbekistan. There, during the afternoon, after the classes at primary school, I sketched the local Uzbek houses. That's when I became an architect. So somehow he was 14, 15 years old, And he felt this attitude in understanding, analyzing those buildings. And you know, this approach is also reflected, of course, in a mature drawing. So here, this is the famous Rajasthan Square, you know, with the three madrasas. You know. So we will see how throughout his life, in different steps of his works, there are not necessarily recurrent themes, but something that moves from one period to another, and as we will see, from one idea to another. We will see how he justifies this methodology. Second part of his life, in the 50s, so he's in Tel Aviv, he studied at Technion in Haifa, where he graduated in 1955, and also during the military service, he was studying in the Fine Art Academy, in the Avni Academy in Tel Aviv. So somehow we see also that he had this double background as an architect engineer and as an artist. And this is a very interesting component, as we will see in his work, because there will be always a dialogue between two disciplines. And of course, the memory is involved in this dialogue. After graduation, immediately he started to work as a young architect with his professor Alfred Neumann, who was a student of Peter Behrens. And he, after 1968, when Neumann passed away, he established his own office, but he starts to travel because he was visiting professor in Canada, in Montreal especially, and United States. In the 90s, he participated to the competition of the Heinz Galinsky Schule school, the first school built after the Shoah in Berlin. He won the competition, and somehow, I mean, in order to follow the works, he moved to Berlin. So it is the work that somehow is dictating him where to move and where to go. So he established his architectural office in Berlin. Meanwhile, he was also teaching in Vienna. And as you see, he was based in Berlin, and he decided to be buried in Berlin. And he was drawing and designing until the very last days of his life. So let's move immediately to his 46 sketchbooks, just to understand how the memory is involved in the setting of these sketchbooks. And they are not just, you know, journals for recording daily activities, but rather the opposite. They are, you know, a tool for reflecting from the intellectual point of view. Then, of course, yes, also for, you know, exploring the form through sketches, but it is much more. So it is an intellectual visual journal. I think this is a very effective definition. Those are visual journals. And in this regard, we can see the, you know, the complexity of the intellectual personality of Zvi Hecker, because he doesn't write only about architecture, but actually about art, about literature, so about music even, or movies. So he was really interested in exploring the different manifestation of art in general. It's a pivotal to understanding his design methodology, and it's very famous, his sentence, "I draw because I have to think." So drawing for him, exploring the form through continuous iterations, was a matter for investigating the form, was a matter of thinking, actually. It's a critical tool for exploring the interplay between architecture and landscape, and we will see how important was for him to have the building possibly almost be considered as a part of the landscape, as existing elements of the landscape. Rigorous iterative drawing process as phenomenological inquiry of observing, abstracting, and reconfiguring forms. So, for instance, in many parts, he's drawing, analyzing through the drawing ancient architectures, and he's comparing some specific typological elements of ancient architecture with one of his designs. So it's like, you know, creating, analyzing in a fragmented way different aspects of architecture to then compose his own idea of architecture. As a bridge between historical references and personal innovation. So there is always this dialogue in relation to history and his perspective, his view. And probably this is also the reason why it is really impossible to classify Zvi Hecker in one movement or another, because you know, he was exploring different kind of forms, methodologies, and as we will see, the outcomes, they will look very different, but somehow there is you know, a subtle trait which is connecting them, as we will see. So just to show you some pages of the sketchbooks, it could be something, you know, really like 2 pages ready to be published, I would say. So as you can imagine, it takes a lot of time to write something like that, and you know, to sketch. In this case, he's just exploring nature, shapes of flowers, how they could be generated through the spiral. So we start to see already this reference to geometry in nature, which is something, a recurrent topic, very important for him. Or we can see something, you know, more, you know, articulated. And please note that, well, the sketchbooks, and I was lucky in this regard, they are mainly written in English. But when he comes into personal themes, because for instance in the sketchbooks he records also his dreams, most of the times they are written in Hebrew, because of course he was also able to talk Hebrew. And so there is, you know, this multi-layering dimension of how to use the sketchbooks. Drawings could be with different techniques, could be pen, could be pencil, could be crayon, could be, you know, watercolor or mixed media. Really as an effective way for reasoning and being inspired also by elements of everyday life. He, in some pages, he's sketching heads, for instance, trying to analyze the, you know, microstructure of a tissue composing a head. So, inspiration from many different aspects. So, about memory also, what he did, well, I can't state all the correspondence, but most part of his correspondence, we have a memory of it, we have a track, because first he was writing the letters on the sketchbooks, and then, you know, he was writing properly the letter. So, for instance, we also have letters to Bruno Zvi, and there is a track of them. But you see how he was able to play, you know, with the official letter, maybe with some amends, or, and then suddenly a drawing is popping up, an idea, and so he doesn't have any prejudice in mixing up the different things. So in the sketchbooks, you can find also something like that, and here I start to introduce more this concept related to memory, because somehow since the early years of his career, let's say 1960, 65, he was already thinking about a building in forms of a spiral. So even with his master, Alfred Neumann, they designed as a project, you know, a sort of a spiral skyscraper. And so the spiral became, you know, the form to be explored because of its multiple meanings, as we will see. And actually, his masterpiece, at least in Israel, is considered the spiral house. But the spiral house, the project and the construction started in 1985. But here you see we are in sketchbooks, 79-84, and he's already exploring the forms, maybe, you know, just revising some drawings from Leonardo da Vinci, or, you know, moving to this idea of this never-ending shape of the spiral, always referring, if you see at the bottom, to the golden ratio and to the idea of, you know, the snail and its regular drawings in terms of geometry. Also, please note this pictorial attitude. So, for instance, here the sketchbook, we see, if you recognize, this is the building of the marriage of Virgo Maria by Raphael. I mean, close, I mean, these are 2 pages, close to this speculation in the form of the spiral that now maybe it is still a utopian form. Of course, we don't see any translation into a house, but nevertheless, soon we will see how this recurrent idea of you know, the spiral exploring different ways becomes essential for his forthcoming project. So here we see other sketchbooks, other drawings of the sketchbooks. He had in this sequence of exploration of the form, he had one specific idea. What he learned from the tradition of Islamic architecture was, we will see, I mean, the ornamentation, the beauty of the geometrical pattern, etc., but especially the importance of the courtyard. Any residential project that he carried out, he was always focusing on a central courtyard as the most important space for people to socialize. It could be semi-private, semi-public, but this was essential for him. Now, his first spiral was, you know, mass, and there were no voids. So he was struggling in this exploration of the form in understanding how would it possible to create this central void in order to obtain the courtyard as the most important space of a house. And so he is continuing with his drawings. And it's unbelievable because here we are still in 1983. He will get the commission for the spiral house in 84, late 84. And here he's already imagining the way how to do it, setting possibly a house which is like a staircase, as if to each apartment corresponds, let's say, a macro steps of a staircase. Of course, we start to see many symbolic implications in relation to these steps, this possibly infinite development of the spiral as a sequence of stairs, which refers to the Jacob's ladder to reach the paradise, for instance. Just, you know, we will do, we will see just another of his design to better understand especially in relation to the importance of the form and the consistency of the design. This is his thought. The consistency of the design should depend on the design idea and not on the quality of the materials, their use, or any technology. The idea must be so strong that the realization might be done in various ways, in various materials, and by different craftsmen, unskilled workers, myself or my friends. It also should be done in stages and probably even continuously, a house which is never finished. And this is somehow, maybe it's not the proper term, but this will turn into his obsession, I mean, not exactly the proper term, as a project which is never finished. And we will see how, with the spiral house, he was exploring the form before. He continued to explore the form while the construction process was ongoing. He will continue to draw the spiral house after it was finished. So this is his idea, because he thought we can try to get close to perfection, but there is never limit to get closer, because actually we can never achieve it. And indeed, for instance, in many of his sketchbooks, he is reporting some of the writers, for instance, Honoré de Balzac, who was amending his printed copy of his novel, as if the author himself is criticizing himself. No, here I had to do better. I should have considered also this and that. So in this regard, we just do one step behind and we see his design for the Dabiner house with his professor Alfred Neumann and his study fellow Eldar Sharon. What do we see in this design? There is a strong modularity. There is also the idea of the fractal creation. So the microscale can be combined to generate something that is expressed also in the larger scale. And with this design, the historians, of course, they talk about a reference to brutalism or relying too much on geometry. He was indeed exploring the hexagon, the pentagon, the dodecahedron, and all these possibilities. But if we see into details, courtyard at the center as the most important part of this building, so as we saw before. And please consider that this Dabiner house, which is, it includes several apartments, and he was living in one of them. It was built before the spiral house, but it was in front of the spiral house. So somehow he had the possibility of experience this architecture in a very close way. Inside the layout of the apartments, as you can see, this is an interior design element which is recalling the traditional Ottoman house, I mean, no need to say. And we can see how it is reflected in plan and how these modular elements are used in a very effective way, where the outer space has the same hierarchy of the inner space. So the dialogue is very strong. And so those, outer space related to the house are these, are somehow the space for having the dialogue with a more distant landscape. Now, I take you to another project on which Zvi Hecker was working on right before getting the commission of the spiral house, which was actually the urban planning of a portion of Ramat HaSharon in Israel. He has been working 2 years on this project, And then, you know, the local government, they changed their mind, but he has been working extensively. And you see how also here we see this reference to the spiral. And, you know, he used to say, when a project is not realized, of course it's not wasting of time, because in each project there is a seed, which is the memory, of a forthcoming project. And indeed he had a motto borrowed by his dear friend, the sculptor Gershuni: if an idea doesn't bring to another idea, it's a sterile idea. This was so from the Ramat HaSharon city center, we see how we change the scale, but we move to the spiral house. Now, when we see something like that, and I'll be honest with you, every time I start studying this building, I say to myself, okay, Paola, you did not understand anything, you know? And I have to start from the scratch. Because you see the articulation, we have so many different languages. Well, you know, some scholars, they compared Zvi Hecker to Anthony Gaudí, so just for staying with outsiders of architecture. And as we said, so he did this sequence of steps as apartments, but he's including many different things. So for instance, on that side, and by the way, as you move, the building is moving with you somehow. It seems that it is moving with you. You cannot catch the building in one glance, I mean, its design, but you see how, for instance, there is this idea of dematerialize the mass, taking out the mass. Where does it come from? These are the mukarnas. The mukarnas he saw when he was a young boy. So the idea of, you know, taking out the matters, or, you know, the geometric decoration. But not only that, so here we see the strong geometry in the sequence of the plans and the progress of the plans. And we will listen from his words what is really geometry in architecture, which is, I think, a very interesting concept also for contemporary design. So you see, the design is very rigorous, very much based on the growing of the spiral. Then, if we go and see the details, for instance, there is the use of the local stones, which is not any specific, you know, valuable stones like, I don't know, marble or granite. It's local stones. Maybe it could be even related to a cheapskate, but still, it talks also the local language. And also, now we try to see more and more the details in this articulation of volumes and bodies, which are determined by intersection. But for instance, you know, he was also inspired by observing elements not strictly related to architecture, meaning he was trying to solve some specific problems while the construction site was ongoing. For instance, the intersection of these corrugated elements, you know. He found a solution observing the way the Japanese lady are, you know, putting their hair together with these wooden sticks. And there is one sketchbook is full of these drawings, just in order to understand how it is possible. Or we see here some elements like that. So for instance, do you see that there are fragments of mirrors? Those fragments of mirrors is something that he saw. These are in mosques and madrasas in Samarkand. They are composed, but of course they follow the path for ascending the spirals, and so they reflect also, what is going on the stairs, and so the space is amplified. And then we start seeing an interesting concept. First, I also try to give a name to this articulation of space. So it looks like self-generated architecture as a spontaneous growing. We see shell, valve, incrustation, concretion, bothroid, membrane, den. So really something related to an organic language of, a natural element which is growing in itself. But I would like to share with you what he was really thinking about his spiral house. So it is a work of incomplete precision, because it is so precise, it can be really finished. No, incomplete precision. No limit to the precision one can achieve. The spiral's incompleteness is also its poetry, because poetry is the most precise expression of our need for precision. Expressive as it is, the spiral can be fully understood. It speaks to many languages at once and at the same time. It speaks Arabic about human condition. It argues in Hebrew, in the sheer necessity to bring the muscles and materials together. But it is quite fluent in Russian when construction becomes architecture. Its Italian is very Baroque, as spoken in Piedmont by Guarino Guarini. The spiral is a Tower of Babel in miniature. This is his idea, and please, we didn't mention in his biographical note that in the 1780s, he was in contact with many art galleries in Italy, so he was very much in touch with the Italian culture. For instance, he was collaborating with Mario and Marisa Merz. And so he's mentioning somehow here all the memories, but not only of his intellectual approach. These are memories of something that he experienced directly, if you want. So we were talking about the spiral, as you know, the Jacob's ladder as a symbology, the spiral as, the always continuous growing forms, I mean the spiral of Borromini, for instance. And there is another strong symbolic meaning that we will see. I just would like to share with you also these images. This is Hecker's on the construction site for 4 years. He was gone every day on the construction site because he thought that if the architect was not active, the construction would be poorer somehow. And he was fighting a lot, especially with the builder, because every evening he had 3, hammers of different weights, and he was adjusting, let's say, what he considered to be not perfectly executed, but he was really an active actor in order also to understand how to find new solutions. So in this regard, he wrote on the sketchbook, working on the construction of the spiral, I became involved in the translation of my own design into the language of the available materials and its adaptation to the evolving situation on the building site. The translation became a new original. And this is also something very interesting because, for instance, according to what Evans wrote, architects, they don't do buildings, they do drawings of buildings. So Zvi Hecker is telling us, I was really involved in the making of the building by being active on the construction side and every day trying to face how to translate my conceptual idea, which is essentially a drawing. And I think this is a very interesting thing, because if we think about all the implication of a translation, also, in literature, if we read in original language or translate it, it's another story. Although according to Benjamin, as Zvi Hecker says, it's another creation. And he was pleased somehow of sharing this new creation with the masons, with the workers, and all the people contributing to this building. Now, just to show you also, I mean, there are hundreds of these drawings, but the accuracy he was considering for, exploring the form of his building. So these are project drawings. So this is not just, these are really project drawings. The way he's using color, the way he's analyzing simultaneously at different scales and different kind of representations, they all contribute to the understanding of, of his approach as a holistic approach to the project. And very often he stated, I am an artist whose profession is architecture. So he's always emphasizing this aspect. Yes, I am an architect, but I am an artist, first of all. Which means that in architecture, the art component must be there. And I think this is a very important lesson for contemporary design, because in contemporary design, I think that we hide behind, sustainability and materials, and yes, but where is the form? Because according to the exploration of the form, which is the artistic component, then we do architecture. Otherwise, we are doing something else. We can, okay, but let's call it in another way. So, that's very relevant. Indeed, he wrote, beauty is the function of architecture. Beauty is the function of architecture. In other words, expression itself is one of the primary functions of architecture. If architecture is beauty, beauty demands to live, to come to the fore. And that's why I draw, because I have to think, because I must find a way to take out this beauty. This was, his process. Now, from this moment on, after 1985, when the construction site of the spiral started, we see in the sketchbooks a different approach, because effectively he's trying to understand how to solve specific problems as the process was ongoing. And I started to see some drawings like that one. I started to see these serpents of snakes, and I was wondering, what are these snakes? What's the meaning of that? It was very interesting. And also these snakes that we see in this axonometric view, then we can also see them in plan. That sequence of mirrors that we saw before, it's a snake. And the snake, the serpent, is the memory of the lost paradise. So for him, the snake is really an active agent within the project to connect the different elements, because the snake in itself, it has this double meaning. It is dangerous because it can poison you, but it can also heal you if you take the right dose. And so somehow the snake becomes an element of a strong symbology of his Lost Paradise, that is the spiral house, where, as he wrote in one sketchbook, the paradise couple will follow very soon, as the snake was there before. And so here we see in the symbology of this path the snake going up, but at one point we really see the snake. I mean, this is really something incredible. Now, this idea, we saw the Dublin house before, and at one point he will do this drawing of synthesis. I told you that the spiral house, the Dublin house, they are on the same site, I mean nearby in Tel Aviv. And once he said, well, the outcome is different, but essentially they have the same philosophy, because they embed a geometrical concept, but the geometry must somehow dissolve in a project. It is just a tool for achieving the final project. And so this is how he did this drawing in a synthetic way. And he spoke about the affinity with Muslim tradition. Though my architecture has been always in affinity with the Muslim tradition of architecture and geometrical ornament, my drawings and sculptures were usually images and reflection of my thoughts and forms developed first for my architectural designs. The Muslim calligraphy, ornament, and even parts of some structures create background of my own architecture. And he experienced Muslim architecture when he was 14, 15. But somehow it was there. It was part of his background. It was part of his memory. Now we move to another project. So we saw an iconic project in Israel. After the unification of Israel, he built also social housing and many other projects. And now we move to Europe, when he won this competition for the Eins-Galinski Schule, and here you see an image from above. And maybe the story becomes even more complicated here. So once I was in conversation with him, and he defined this project, the shaken order. It is based on the spiral logarithmic structure. Logarithmic structure of what? Of the sunflower. And so, there is this, the scholars, they report the fact that a sunflower was donated to Zvi Hecker from Anneting, who was working in a Louis Kahn office. And so somehow this flower became the inspiration for these Fibonacci series, etc. And we see how, again, in the drawings, the strong geometry is there. But the story was actually a bit different. It dates back to his years in Samarkand, when he was a small child. It was a time of a food shortage, and the sunflower was helpful, the seeds of the sunflower. So the sunflower has a personal meaning for me, and it is also nature's greatest phenomenon. The formation of its seeds follows the mathematical sequence of the golden section. It provides great nutrition. Its vibrant color radiates the great distances. What else could nature do for us? So, you see how nature becomes a strong element of inspiration. Nature is there, geometry is there, memory is there, but especially something related to his childhood for a building destined to children. This is a primary school. And again, the exploration of the form through wonderful sketches. And you see again, I don't know the perception that you have of these buildings, But it seems that these elements, which are the classrooms, somehow they are moving, and again, do you see how the circle is perfectly defined as a central courtyard, as the core of the project, where people can come together and socialize. But actually, he wanted to do even more for the children. So he wanted to design a micro city just a children's approach according to their scale. So to give them a space made of, cul-de-sac, small courtyards, dens, where they could hide. They could really experience their space as their own space. That's what he was trying to do. And he was using this dynamism. The idea, is really the dynamism of the building. Why? Because the learning process is a very dynamic process. For me, the dynamic element is a means of conveying a notion of strength and power, and cultural strength and power, since I seek to produce the impression of movement in architecture. And that's the impression that we get. So here his quote, if an idea does not bring to another idea, it is a sterile idea. And describing the process for designing the Heinz Kalinsky school, he referred again to the snakes coming from the spiral, at this time because he was stuck at one point, and he's starting to introduce these snakes, and actually then they have been translated, the serpents, into the path connecting the different classrooms in a very dynamic way. Materials, they are relatively cheap, as he stated at the very beginning we saw. It's not a matter really of materials, but rather the form. So, and this is how it looks like for children. They can hide, they can explore the space. But suddenly, the metaphor, every building in Zvi Hecker's philosophy has a metaphor, which is maybe not directly declared, but it comes out at one point. So, while exploring the form, in Hebrew, the school is named Bet Safer, which means the house of the books. And at one point, they did this model. So they found out that, according to the vertical elements of the school, it was like an open book. And this is the perfect metaphor for a school. But it was not a direct intention to him. But the meanings, they come out according to the exploration of the form. So the school, he stated, was first a sunflower, then a city, then a book. The unique nature of the sunflower, not its form, is at work here. The way children assimilate knowledge is reminiscent of the way the sunflower captivates the sun's rays. So he's so precise in exploring the form, but here he's stating, not the form is important, the final outcome is important. And it's not strictly related to geometry. Yes, the geometry is there, the function is there, but that's not the final aim of architecture. So this is his idea. In relation to the memory as an active agent, we see now another project in Berlin, which has been realized. So he was commissioned to design in the place where in Lindenstrasse in Berlin, where the first synagogue was destroyed in the Kristallnacht, 1938, when all the synagogues were destroyed in Berlin. And he he could have done many things. He could have considered the importance of the volume of the pre-existing synagogue, but actually what he did, it was something very simple, but so meaningful, so essential. He observed the position of the former building, the position of the benches, sorry, of the former buildings, and somehow he replicated their position, open air, and you know, again, it is a book that you can read, and you know, according to a well-known cultural approach, Jewish people, I mean, this is the people of the book, and so you can go there, sit there, and you are somehow part of the memory, because with your physical presence of being there, you are also part of the process of embedding in yourself the memory of what this synagogue was. And that's it, nothing else. So this is a strong relation with the memory, I think. Another building in Europe, again in Germany, is the Jewish Cultural Center. And this is a very articulated building with different functions for the local Jewish community. And this reference to letters, to Jewish alphabets, is there. Because you see, there is a main central body, and then there are all these projecting elements. By the way, all is articulating the space in its complexity of interior and outer space for possibly meeting, gathering. So this is the plan. Do you notice these 5 projected elements? So the columns, they all have different sections, if you notice them. It's also emphasizing the sections. And what are those sections? This was an explanation because I couldn't understand, so I asked him how it works. And he did this simple, sequence. They represent the first letters of the Hebrew alphabets. Okay, a reference, to written words, but this could be something, very, how can I say, manneristic, maybe. But his explanation, it's something else. He said, as I have written, the Hebrew letters were not applied to the columns, but the design brought the idea. So it's not something that he preconceived, but it's something that comes according to the subject he is designing. I don't have any plans of Duisburg, okay, this was something personal project, except I think these are the columns, and so he's reporting all the letters, that they come as a necessity of the design. So this is the idea. Another important aspect of his design is the relations with the landscape. So memory and landscape. This is something also I think very interesting, and at the moment I'm researching a lot on these aspects. And I want to show you one of his early buildings in Israel. This is the synagogue in the Negev desert, designed with Alfred Neumann. And we see how, this is really the exploitation of geometrical power with the dodecahedron. But the idea, I think it's also interesting, the fact that you see there is this desert, there is the vastness, and this is like an UFO, I mean, something just landed there, because the memory of the landscape is somehow holding this kind of structure. So this is the idea. Modular geometry is a kind of matrix and grammar for the architectural design. But of course, it is only the way to make the idea intelligible, not an aim in itself, rather a kind of scaffolding taken off when the building is completed. So if we are stuck in the geometry as a final aim of our design, we are failing our design somehow. And we see, you know, this concept in the probably one of his most visionary projects, which was unrealized, and it is the project generally named Mountains. We will see the chronology is very articulated. This is the project he did for Bucharest. So essentially, he's trying to take the landscape into the city, existing city, build city with a strong density, and maybe they are in need of a new landscape. So he's imagining those buildings in form of mountains, and they come, and you see already, again, it's something that shows a dynamism within the city. So you see the chronology, he did this proposal for different cities, competition. There is Rotterdam, Bucharest, Berlin, Amsterdam, and he did even some sketches for London, by the way. And then you see at the end, we will see Venice, something. And you know, one day I was flying over the Alps, and I took this photo. And it's really, I mean, the essence of what he was interpreting. But you know, these kind of drawings, they could seem expressionistic, utopian, I mean, impossible to be realized. But he really tried to translate them into architecture as, you know, apartments, something like that. Also always, you know, referring to model making as a good practice for verifying the effectiveness of the form. Now, at the end of the story, just for understanding the importance also of memory and how it is possible to change the scale, which is also, I mean, a refined concept embedded in the concept of the fractals. We can generate something at different scales. This project turned into an art installation, site-specific, for the Venice Biennale in 2000. And so this is how the mountains became a work of art in the Biennale. And here we see Zvi Hecker in dialogue with Gaetano Pesce, who recently passed away. So inspiration from the nature come into the city to imagine, you know, how it is possible to shape the city, to change the city. And a more recent project, the Königin Maxima Kaserne in Amsterdam Schiphol. This is very close to the airport of Amsterdam. And you know, when I saw this project, I was trying to understand also the relationship with the landscape. And again, it's really very interesting. When you fly, especially students, observe what you see. Because I saw what they call a polderland. And what he did, essentially, he regimented the polderland, you know, by creating this connecting part of the different bodies of the Kaserne, referring to these canals which are connecting, you know, the regular structure of the polder. So it is really an incredible interpretation and translation of the memory of the landscape into the project. These are his sketches for, conceptual sketch, exploring the form. And here we see also a study by using mixed media to better verify the possibility of the form according to the existing landscape. Now, the naturescape. Hecker's approach transcends performal mimicry, instead establishing a profound dialogue between the built environment and natural systems. While often interpreted through geometric complexity, Hecker's work reveals a deeper intention of architecture as a mediating layer between human culture and the natural environment, where the building becomes memory's interpretative lens through which landscape is perceived, experienced, and understood. So now I would like to move to his last project, which is under construction. It is in Italy, named La Casa di Ella, Ella's house. And in this project, he was about 90 here when he started his design. And he did many conceptual sketches, and his obsession was to bring the landscape into the house and not the contrary. And he was really trying to focus on this aspect, according to what? According to the contour lines of a very panoramic area. So this was his idea. And he started to explore the forms by, differentiating the different bodies of the house so that they can become part of the terraced existing system, as if they can really somehow melt in the existing landscape. So this was the idea of his projects, always verifying the form through models, study models. My buildings will look less and less like buildings, and probably more and more like natural phenomena. All those so-called different approaches of contemporary architecture seem to me nearly the same, as they always draw a portrait of a building, while I intend to paint a landscape. And so this is the difference, architecture as landscaping. This is the difference. So for this project, he left about 1,000 sketches. So again, 1,000, not 100, 1,000 sketches. And this is for students in architecture. Sometimes they do 3 sketches. Come on, this is it. So, do you remember, did you study Mimar Sinan when he said for the mosque in Edirne? Okay, now I did something good. So we really have to learn from these masters. Huh? So, iterations, continuously, serpents coming in, more and more. This is at home, drawings, of course, also proper technical drawings as a overlapping way. We can read, one of his drawings is a multi-layer drawings. We can really read the different layers he was considering. We do not know where the idea is hiding. So why sketching so much? Why continuously sketching? We don't know where the idea is hiding. Its location does not appear on any map, and therefore cannot be reached by any public transport. It's a disadvantage because in order to reach such an unknown destination, we have to build our own means of transport. For me, architectural sketches are such a vehicle, and the metaphor is the vehicle's fuel. That's why I draw, because I have to think. Okay, we are just going to conclusion, and very briefly, I want to show you some of these artworks also. The memory of artwork is grounded in architecture and the reverse. Because please consider that always, while he was designing, he was painting, and while he was painting, he was designing. So it is a never-ending dialogue. So for instance, the prodrome of the Spiral House could be in this painting of this spiral. So it's a very conceptual, of course. Like you see how there is a translation. Or later on, as he keep on, exploring the form, also in painting, he will do the same. Inspiration in different timing coming from the spiral. As I am painting simultaneously with architectural design, I can't dissociate myself from the architectural form. Or for instance, another painting inspired by Tokyo International Forum, another design, inspired by the Jewish Cultural Center in Duisburg, as a painting. Also, he did some art installation. The first one titled, If We Are Lucky. So his idea, he wrote a text about, as I said, he had a strong sense of humor, and he thought that very soon we would all go back to the caves. And I think he was right, actually. And so the idea is to create this den. If we are lucky, we will go back to the cave, essentially. So this is the idea. So what is painting for him? My paintings are attempts, sometimes tragic attempts, to penetrate beneath the surface of what I know by practice of architecture, reuse of elements, familiarized with constant contours, repetitions. So again, also painting for better explore the potential of architecture. And we see here this Tokyo International Forum effective design that before we saw in painting. Or the spiral continues to be a source of inspiration for other projects. Until the very latest here we have the Neumeister House. And also for one of his latest exhibition in Italy, that I had the honor to be the curator, but he designed the setting up. And the design, as you can see, was a spiral. So interestingly, still this recurrent drawing form. I'm not trying to attain a particular expression that would be distinctly mine. It would be anyhow fruitless. I believe that if you cultivate your own garden, something will grow out of your seeds. And I think it's very interesting. This is one of his last paintings. Usually he was always hiding, concealing forms in his paintings. But here it seems to me I can see a sort of human face and all, these volumes coming out for a mind, possibly. And I would like to really conclude with my own statement. Thanks to his life background, Zvi Hecker spoke 6 languages confidently: Polish, Russian, Hebrew, English, French, and German. I never lived long enough anywhere to learn any language properly, which is not true. The sketchbooks are written in a fantastic English. Perhaps this linguistic liminality became his greatest strength by developing a multifaceted architectural vocabulary beyond words. His drawings became the universal grammar through which he could fully articulate his vision, unconstrained by the limitation of any single verbal language. Memory became his true native tongue. Fragments of remembered places, cultural echoes, and spatial recollections assembled into a personal architectural syntax, transcending conventional vocabularies. His oeuvre stands as a complex poem whose verses continue to reveal new meanings to those willing to learn his unique architectural language. Thank you. So please, if you have any questions. Sorry, it's a bit late. This is the synthesis of the spiral. Yeah.
Sanırım soru gelmedi. I will say, well, thank you for this very well narration of this, I mean, playful, dynamic, nice to listen to you, Paola. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And inspiring.
Through you, your presentation. We didn't know that.
Oh,
We
okay.
read about this, she says, but I admire his ideas.
I'm very happy about this, and I hope you will explore more, starting with his websites, because his office is still active, and also there is his foundation, Zvi Hecker Stiftung, and so they are promoting new activities, so hopefully also among students he will be better known, especially for his methodology. I think that it is important to reflect on it.
We will be waiting for your, I mean, the next presentation after you finished your research.
With my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure for us to have you, Paola.
Thank you.
I would just like to introduce you very small document of ours and also it's very small, you know, our.
This is the best part, isn't it? Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Çektim. Çok güzel. Evet.
Done.